Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Life by Design podcast. On this week's episode, I talk with Dr. Ezzie Spencer, named one of the top life coaches to watch in 2024 by Entrepreneur magazine. Dr. Ezzie is a former human rights lawyer turned international five-time bestseller author and founder of the Money Splinter Method. In this week's episode, expect to learn all about what money splinters are, invisible barriers that are holding us back from more financial success, the different channels when it comes to money, and much, much more. Enjoy the episode. Now, guys, before we start this week's episode of the podcast, I want to talk to you about the Life by Design Mastermind. The Life by Design Mastermind is the mastermind for go-getters and high achievers who are looking to create a more successful, fulfilling, and balanced life by design. If you're serious about transforming your life, achieving your goals, and living a life on your terms, then the Life by Design is your golden ticket. Head over to the show notes and click on the link for more details about the program. Ezzie Spencer, welcome to the podcast.
Pleasure to be here.
You, my friend, are very new in my world, and it's off the back of my girlfriend having a chat with you a few weeks ago.
How fun is that?
I know. So I've been deep diving into your work. There's a couple of things that I'm really interested in understanding. Money splinters being one of them, and money just being a fascinating topic, I think, and no doubt the people in your world think so as well. Before we get on to that, can you give the guys a 60 to 90 second spiel of who you are and what has got you to where you are today?
Yes, 60 to 90 seconds.
See how you go. See how there's no timer.
Well, the very short version is that I actually started out as a human rights lawyer, which is what no one expects, I'm going to say, given that now I work in the energetic realm and very much supporting people to get out of their own way. Entrepreneurs mainly when it comes to money and abundance, but it's definitely been a very feminine career, meaning that I have spiraled. It has not been a linear path, and there's plenty that we can double click on and to uncover there. But essentially I had a spiritual awakening on the 15th of March 2011 when I was doing my PhD in therapeutic jurisprudence, which is all about the law as healing for women who'd been subjected to domestic violence and sexual assault. And I realized as I was doing my PhD that whilst that really first part of my career, which was around 10 years, had been deeply meaningful, I was more interested in the healing aspect rather than reforming the law. Like both important, justice, safety, and so forth, super important, but just in terms of my own life's calling was more towards the healing. So that was 2011, and it really took me on a magic carpet ride. And one thing led to another thing. I grew a business very organically at a time where social media was very new and blogs were still pretty new. And by the time I finished my PhD in 2013, I had a global coaching company. I ended up writing a book, which became a bestseller. I moved to New York City in 2018. My work was very successful over there in the US. And to fast track to today, I'm really supporting people with removing what I call these splinters, which are essentially the way that life has entered you or the way that life has pierced your consciousness and is causing a disruption in your path, so to speak. So I support people to really understand what that might be, dissolve it, and then move forwards to really fulfill your own potential.
There's a lot in that. I'm interested just in taking potentially a sidetrack just for a moment, but what got you interested in domestic violence?
Well, I was working as a lawyer at the time for an Australian government agency, and we were looking at a national reform of domestic violence laws. So I was already working on reforming Australia's laws actually, to make sure that they were effective, just in line with the human rights obligations that Australia had committed to internationally. And I was also doing pro bono legal work at legal centres of an evening. And so I just naturally attracted, for whatever reason, a lot of people who'd been subjected to violence and abuse. And I also saw through the law reform inquiry that I was working on just how badly the law fell short in that area. So I thought, hey, this is an area where we actually need to raise the standard in order to make sure that at the very bare minimum, we're fulfilling human rights obligations, but having an experience which is not going to be re-traumatizing for people who've been subjected to violence and abuse when they come into a legal process. So it was just a real galvanizing feeling of tremendous injustice, actually, that got me interested in that.
I know this is not necessarily your area anymore, but I've just kind of going it a little bit. But would you say that we've made a fair bit of progress since 2013, I think, if I got my timelines right, about when you kind of finished
Yeah.
up there.
Yeah. And so great. Okay, yeah, good with the timelines. Yeah, I definitely think that whilst it's not squarely my area of work anymore, I could definitely see that there's greater understanding now inside of the legal system that the adversarial process, meaning the way that, particularly in Australia, we find truth and justice, doesn't necessarily work in cases of interpersonal violence. And so we obviously need to still ensure that there's justice for all parties involved, accused offenders as well as people who've been subjected to that. But it may not be through the court processes that we run many of our other legal systems through in order to achieve that substantive equality and justice. So I do think that there's been a greater, or definitely in the time that I was working in that field, over a 10-year period, I saw that there was like a lot of waking up to that truth and a lot of openness, even at the stage of, say, like someone working inside of the system who's interfacing, with someone who's been affected by that, that might just involve a different, interpersonal approach, even, at the point of collecting a complaint and so forth. Having said that, I think we've really got a long way to go. And my PhD was like quite a radical revisioning of what a discursive or transformative justice might look like in that area. And I think that there's still a lot of scope for improvement.
Yeah, I know that isn't where you are at these days, but I'm just interested. I do find that space really interesting, and I guess it's. I'm always interested in understanding it from a female perspective because as a general rule of thumb, it's going to look very different from a female perspective than it does from a male. So it's good to get insight into the minds and the nervous system and the body of females and just how they see it. And again, having come from a family of that, but I'm experiencing it very differently. It's nice to hear from women as to how they see it.
Yeah, well, it's actually a really direct line into the work that I do now, which is around money. And look, this is one of the driving motivators for the work that I do now, because when we look at what are the primary drivers of domestic violence, when you look from a meta perspective globally, what it is that we see is that it's actually inequality. And not all violence is going to be man on woman violence. It's not always a gender binary like that, but a lot of it is. And so whenever we're looking at that from a preventative framework, it's like, well, gender inequality, which is often measured through financial inequality, is where we see the highest levels of violence. Now, but when there's less gender inequality, again, measured through a range of means, but financial inequality being a huge one. So when there's greater financial equality between all genders, then we see much lower levels of domestic violence. And that tracks across all kinds of jurisdictions, all kinds of cultures globally. So I think that's a really interesting piece. And we talk about, well, what are some of the motivators for ensuring that we have great access to resources?
It's interesting just on that point. I was looking at some research last week. These are US numbers, but I don't know what the Australian is. I gather it's pretty similar, but it's really interesting that when it comes to divorce, 75% of divorces are initiated by women, of which it goes up to 90% if they're college educated. But I'm guessing of the large portion that are staying in relationships, there's a financial component that probably sits at the top for a lot. Is that kind of number one reason that would keep someone stuck in a relationship that they shouldn't or don't want to be in?
I mean, I'm not sure about relationships in general, but I think that probably does track. It's more, I suppose, from the perspective of, like a meta level and patterning level, that when there is in a society more financial inequality or disparity, like, for example, like pay gaps or, just access to resources, then that's where you're going to see that there's more violence and more abuse. So I think definitely what it is that you've said would track alongside that, but I'm not up to date with all of the research in.
So talk me through energetics when it comes to money, because this is a topic I hear a bit of, but in terms of really solidifying that and making it quite simple for someone to understand, can you break down the kind of energetics when it comes to money and how that works?
Well, I work with a really specific method, which is based on what it is that I see. So when I'm working with someone, I see what is a power channel running down the right-hand side, the love channel that runs down the middle, and the peace channel that runs down the left-hand side. And what it is I see are literal like splinters, meaning that I can see where someone has been interrupted in one of those channels. Now, a splinter is always a foreign object. Think about the metaphor of you go outside with your bare feet and you get a little splinter in your left little toe. I call them splinters because when I look at someone's channel, they literally look like splinters. And there's a couple of core things inside of that. One is that a splinter is not actually a big deal if you've got the tools to take it out, right? So sometimes when someone really has a cap on their income or they feel that sense of stubborn resistance, no matter how much they work or strive, they can't seem to increase their monthly revenue inside of their business, for example. Or another area that I work with specifically when it comes to entrepreneurs is capital raising. So for example, someone goes out to raise $1 million, $10 million, or even $100 million for their company, and suddenly something that wouldn't necessarily have caused them a huge amount of distress or issues in terms of their day-to-day life rears its head. And so, for example, you might start asking yourself, well, who am I to ask for this amount of money? Or you start to experience confidence wobbles or imposter syndrome and so forth, right? So when we talk about the energetics of money, it can feel like it's a really ephemeral concept, but I think it's important to note that it can actually really manifest in real world situations where you're like, hang on a sec, I can just literally feel like an invisible barrier. Cognitively, I know that I deserve to get paid X, or I know that I'm raising money for a great project that's going to have incredible return for investors. Like I can have that conscious awareness around that. But when there's something countervailing that's running in the unconscious, then it can start to feel like it's an impossible task. And so whenever I'm working with someone, I'm looking at a couple of different levels of what might be going on inside of the unconscious. And the first level is going to be something which most people be familiar with like limiting beliefs, right? So this would be an unconscious agreement that you make with yourself in order to stay in the air quotes, safe zone, which is usually just the familiarity zone, or the comfort zone, which is a bit of a misnomer because it's obviously uncomfortable if you're going through a struggle or that tension in terms of wanting to raise that level, raise the ceiling. So I'm working with someone to surface and also to dissolve whatever's going on in terms of this unconscious agreement. But one thing that's really important, it's something that my approach differs from a lot of other people's, is that we're always looking at those air quotes self-sabotaged kind of behaviors that happen at the unconscious vow level or the unconscious agreement level, limiting belief level. We're looking at that as self-protection, right? Because ultimately what it is that you're doing is you're protecting yourself from touching the pain of the splinter or the tender area around the splinter. Now, where a limiting belief is something that's internal to you, meaning that you created it for yourself, right? A splinter is actually external to you, meaning that it's like that foreign object. It's literally like with your bare feet, you've gone out and you've stepped on that little shard of wood, yeah? It's not you. However, it's going to create issues for you. So similarly, all of us are going to be in a dialogue with life all the time, right? Like it's part of the human experience. Life is going to come into you, particularly if you've got some vulnerabilities, particularly if you've got some weak spots, if you will. And a lot of the time, those are going to be inherited. It's not about pathologizing yourself. It's about understanding and recognizing that you can actually break those deeper patterns, but it requires a bit of a different approach. And so then just trying to keep on pushing through, right? And I work with people who are incredibly ambitious and motivated and have no shortage of grit and determination and capacity to push through. And so it can be a little counterintuitive to the mind to actually slow down, go inside, and to approach it with the spirit of self-compassion and self-forgiveness. And I find, though, that's the most effective way to essentially draw out that underlying block or that underlying splinter. And then you don't have to be involved in terms of the positive self-talk or the reframing or anything like that. It just becomes much more easeful to keep moving forwards towards, whatever it is that your soul is calling you to.
That last, I've got a lot that came out of that, so I'm just going to see if I can stay on track. But that last bit is something that I play with a lot, and I still don't know where the line is, but I'm interested in your thoughts. The dance between the need to keep pushing, albeit pushing is an interesting choice of words, but pushing and persisting, and where is the resistance and insight to go internal? Because there are a lot of people that do need some resilience and the ability to consist and be persistent. but also dancing with that unconscious resistance and exploring that further. Do you have a recipe or an insight around that as to where you dance between those two?
I mean, I think it's a really good question. More and more what it is that I've come to see, and I'm, at a certain point in my career, and I also work with people who are at a certain point in their career as well. I think that dance is probably more complex earlier in one's journey, but I think that it becomes really simple once you've achieved a certain level of success, which is assume that you are the person who's standing in your own way.
Yeah.
And assume that if you go inside and look to the reason why, which might be as simple as simply identifying, your own emotions, your own emotional experience, which might be frustration if you're not able to get to a certain outcome, and then to approach that again through the lens of self-compassion and self-forgiveness, then that's going to usually, in my experience, and again with the people that I work with, tends to be the thing that opens up the space internally that just makes the next step really clear.
So am I right in just paraphrasing what you said there, which as I heard you say, it kind of landed for me. You can generally assume that a person with quite a high level of success is quite a consistent, persistent type person. And for that reason, you'd probably potentially even default to a deeper level of resistance, as opposed to someone who might not have experienced that level of success. And you see a common thread of, lack of consistency, persistence, and the desire for them to kind of feel the grit and determination there. Am I right in paraphrasing you in saying that?
Yeah,
Ish?
I guess, yeah, definitely on the first part of it. In the second part of it, I'll be totally honest, I don't have that much experience in working with people who'd fall into the category of not being able to get going. I think partly because people who come into my world tend to self-select into my world because I'm very feminine in nature, meaning that I don't often really work with people's resistance. I find that most people seek me out because they've tried everything else. It hasn't worked, and they've reached a level of humility inside of themselves that there may be something that they're not seeing.
So you've mentioned this a couple of times, this feminine piece. How does that look different from, say, a masculine approach when it comes to money and energetics?
Well, I guess a couple of things. First is that usually I'll start with this actually. I am a pragmatist at heart. What that means is I really love to be efficient. Like I want to get the best outcome as fast as humanly possible. And I would love for that to feel as like easeful, if not fun as possible. So that's the framework that I'm setting up for myself as a metric of success, right? So what I mean by that, then how does that translate is that I don't personally find it either fun, but then also efficient to keep trying to like blockbuster or keep trying to charge through. That's just not my personal approach. What it is that I find is actually the most efficient in terms of getting the exponential results tends to be finding the micro tweaks and micro attunements that can be made and then pulling these tiny energetic levers. So I guess another way of looking at this is like slowing down to speed up. So for example, when I'm working with someone, I can usually see like the splinters for them going on, and they usually reveal that pretty quickly through their language when they tell me what is the challenge that they're encountering. People that come to me tend to be very intrinsically motivated. They've already got a goal. I'm not helping them to, find some sense of drive or desire. Like they come with that, and also an articulation around the fact that it's kind of annoying to them that they're not there already. So from there, what it is that I'm doing is I'm asking them a series of questions, which for them may feel like this is a bit frustrating. I've gone through all of this before, but I'm getting down into the root of what it is. And then I draw it out. So it's not like I'm going digging around with tweezers, again, to continue the metaphor, to find the splinter. And maybe that speaks more into a more masculine approach, which is like, let's like penetrate and like figure out what's going on, right? Like, let's dig it out. Really, I'm holding up a mirror and then I'm drawing it out in a way that feels a little slower in the moment, but in the slowing down, in the gentleness actually of it, in the tenderness of the process, it actually means that the quantum leap then is able to occur because the space is opening up internally. So happy to speak into that in more detail. I know it sounds a little ephemeral, but for me, it's much more of a directional focus, right? Like I'm drawing out rather than like trying to like force my way in and through.
Gotcha. So one thing that caught my attention that you said just before was around something along the lines of 3 channels that you really dive deep into: power, peace, and love. Can you expand on what that means and what that looks like?
Yeah, totally. So each of these channels have a very different texture and flavor. And ultimately, what we want is for each of these channels to be open energetically. Like we want the energy to be flowing, but each one of these channels is going to be, oftentimes, if we're going for like a really big up level or a big swing up, we're going to find that each one of these channels is splintered and each one of these channels is splintered in a different way. And so, for example, with power, if your power channel is splintered, that's oftentimes going to manifest as fear. Like fear or frustration is a pretty good signal that your power channel is splintered, right? And so the most typical thing that we as humans are scared of, like we're scared of the unknown. We just want to know how. We want to know how it's all going to look. We want to set the goal and then we want to see every single step along the way. So what we often do inside of the power channel when we remove the splinter is go through this process of basically surrendering, so releasing the grip of control and coming into a greater trust of one's own personal power, trust of life, trust of one's own ability to discern who are the right people to get into business with, so to speak, or who are the right, what are the right opportunities to pursue and so forth. So there's an enormous amount of clarity that comes when the power channel is open and flowing. And if you're experiencing confusion or haziness or fogginess or a bit scattered, that's a signal that the power channel is splintered. Yeah, we need to look at that. In terms of the love channel, again, it's a very different energy, has a different flavor, it has a different texture to it. So the channel is actually going to be about self-love and self-worth. And so by the time that someone is in a very, when someone is a successful entrepreneur running their own company, we might not be looking at the love channel first and foremost. But again, the love channel may start to present some issues when you're going to that next level. Like just say you've raised $10 million for your company in the past. So you know how to do that. But suddenly you're going to $100 million with your next capital raise. And suddenly you're having these questions like, who am I to ask for that much money? Like, do I deserve it? Am I good enough to be able to get a return on investment for my investors and so forth? Like, what is that going to mean about me if I fail? So again, these splinters may not be presenting any disturbance in the day-to-day. However, I think every single person is going to encounter deeper and deeper rootings of things inside of themselves. Again, not because there's anything wrong with you, but simply because it's part of the human condition. And so part of what the love channel looks like when we're really anchored in our own self-worth is not linking our own intrinsic value or our own desirability or lovability, acceptability, all of those kind of things to, how much money we're making or how much we're able to raise for our company. Another signal of the love channel being blocked is when there is the chasing energy. So what I mean by that, obviously a certain amount of pursuit or initiation energy is going to be healthy and normal and indeed required to be a successful entrepreneur, right? But when you're just too much in that doing, giving, out there mode, regardless of gender, again, a signal that we might need to be looking at the love channel. And when the love channel is clear, there's just more of a reciprocity of flow, right? So you're receiving as much as you're giving. In terms of the peace channel, this one, again, different flavor, different energy. And so the peace channel it's an interesting one. It often tends to be the last channel that we look at. So a lot of the time the issues will come up with power or the issues, come up earlier in one's journey with love, but we often tend to have love and power open and then a peace channel issue may present. Now, with peace, it's a really interesting one because it can speak into someone who takes too much responsibility, right? again, interesting, because in order to be a CEO, to run your own company, to be doing something and making something in the world, to be running a team, to be standing for something, you're obviously not going to be any stranger to a responsibility. You're probably someone who has naturally taken a burden on your own shoulders, right? Or been willing to pick up the slack. However, it's like that old adage, like what got you here won't take you there, because at a certain level, you cannot scale anymore when you are the one who has to like look over everything, or, you are the one where you're, picking up all of the slack, right? So there tends to be a hyper independence inside of the peace channel, or if someone's splintered in the peace channel, which ironically has got someone to a certain level of success. But there needs to be a relaxation into allowing other people to come in and to support and to elevate through the team in order to go to that next level. So an indicator that you're splintered in the peace channel may be that feeling of like, like I want to go to that next level, but like how? Like I'm already so overstrapped. Like, how could I possibly have any more, capacity, given that every single emergency always ends up being mine anyway? Like, what's that going to look like? And if unconsciously you're thinking or believing that, then of course you're going to stand in your own way, because you don't want to completely lose yourself, or you don't want the next level of success to feel heavy.
There's a lot in that. There's a lot in that. So where do you start with someone? I'm guessing they come to you with a clear money story, money block, money issue, or is it is part of your facilitation to draw that out? I mean, when I think about it myself, just for really quick context, I went bankrupt 5 years ago, and that started a journey for me around money, of which I wouldn't say I'm fully there, but it's been a really interesting journey in just terms of pulling apart beliefs, behaviors, just the works. And even now, as I see a similar pattern of not so much having a cap of what I can earn, that's always been a strength of mine, but a cap of what I can hold.
Yeah.
So I'm processing that through the filters of love. Like I can see, as you were talking about it, I can see all three within me of splinters. But how would you navigate something like that? Is it just really kind of, questioning the person and listening out for that? Is there something that you can see instantly? Like, how would you process something like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so it's oftentimes something that I pick up really quickly, partly because of what I see, partly because I've done a lot of this. So I've got great pattern recognition. Yeah. So, and partly because, let's be honest, entrepreneurs tend to struggle with really similar things. Like it's a particular type of person who's drawn to the entrepreneurial path, right? And so again, it's like a self-selecting group. So it's really interesting because for a lot of people, there is that feeling of like, a lot of people who aren't entrepreneurs, there might be that feeling of, oh my gosh, I couldn't even begin to imagine how I'm going to raise the ceiling on my income. Whereas for entrepreneurs are like, oh no, we know that there's infinite potential of what it is that we could be making. But what it is I'm really concerned about is growing my net worth, or why is it that money feels like handfuls of sand, So again, different set of issues, which is what you've spoken into. So how do I start? So I would see it in someone pretty quickly, but
so when you just on that,
Yeah.
So when you say you see it in someone, what exactly do you mean by that? Is that by the language they're using? Is there something that you're seeing that like you're picking up what they're putting down? Like, what do you mean by you're seeing it?
Both. So yeah, so I
Fascinating.
I guess I can see that this is part of what happened for me with the spiritual awakening that I mentioned back in
Sean, you told me the
2011.
story. That's right now. But yeah.
So I can see things, and from that time, I was able to see things, can see wounds in people, but also, the particular story that you're referencing was when I actually saw the future the night before, which was very helpful to me in that occasion because the future was a home invasion. So I was able to be, in a different place, which meant that I was physically fine, thankfully. So it is a superpower. So I can actually see things, but also because I've done it so much now, it's like there are particular things that I can map into someone's language from pattern recognition. And when I've trained other people in my method, obviously I can't train other people to see energy. I think that's something you've got or you don't. Or if you can train people how to do that, I don't know how to train people how to do that, but I've been able to reverse engineer in terms of the types of symptoms that people would bring in. So it's like a combination of all of those things when I'm working with someone. But usually what happens is that people come to me with a very specific money goal, meaning that they're like, hey, I want to be able to make $100,000 a month, but, I want to make sure that 50% of that is being fed back into my savings account, into my net worth, or, I'm really raising not just that income ceiling, but also that income floor, right? So what I love to say is like, think of your best month ever. If, say, in your business, just to keep that same example, your best month ever was $100,000 in terms of revenue coming into your business. Well, what if that was just your floor? Like, what if you were making $100,000 revenue every single month and then you were going up from there? Cool. Okay, that's a great goal. Now let's start to see what might be blocking you from being able to achieve that, right? And then revenue just being one of the areas that we work inside, we might also be speaking about money in the bank. Like, what's a great amount of money for you that you want to have liquid in your savings account? Or what is a net worth that feels like it's really going to be speaking to your potential, your desires, your goals, what it is you want to be achieving in the world, how you want to be providing for your family, all of those kind of things. So someone is coming into a session with a really clear goal. And if the goal is not really clear, but they've got a sense of the goal, then I'll help them to get really clear in that goal. And I'll also help them to see where they're playing small in relation to their goal. So people sometimes come into a session and they're like, I want to scale from $30,000 a month to $300,000 a month. And I'm like, great, awesome, we could do that. But if someone's coming in at $30,000 a month, they're like, I want to get to $50,000 a month. I'm like, great, we could do that, but have you thought about 10xing it, right? Because ultimately that's going to show you all of these little tweaks and quirks and all of these ways that you're holding yourself back from what it is you're truly capable of. And so then once we've really started with the goal, I call it a home star, and people be familiar with the concept of the North Star or the lodestar or the guiding light. I call it the home star because really what it is that we're doing in my practice is we're coming home to ourselves. That's what happens after we take the splinter out. After you undo the unconscious vows, you come back home to your own natural essence, like your true state. And your true state is always going to be one of personal power, self-love, wholeness, inner peace, and coherence, because that's just who we are. That's just who we are in our essence. Now, the exact flavor of that is going to depend upon, our own life journey, what it is that we're working with inside of a session. But I take people through this 3-part process, which starts with clarifying the home star. And we're not like plucking a home star out of the air. The home star is coming from a real place inside of ourselves, like a real yearning, a real desire, something that's true for us inside of our soul blueprint or a money blueprint, right? So setting that is the beginning. Finding out, then I flash up, well, what's the unconscious vow or the unconscious agreements or the limiting beliefs that we've made to say that we're not allowed to have that, or we don't believe it's possible for us to have that for ourselves. Like, we're here to build other people's dreams, but not our own, or it's not possible for me to hold the money that comes into my world, like whatever it is. We find out exactly what that agreement is. We release it, we let it go. We come into another part of the process where we find, well, why did we make that agreement in the first place? Like, just to use the example that you use, like, why did you make the agreement that you're great at making money, but it's harder for you to, maintain that financial level that comes in? Like, why do you keep falling back to the same financial baseline each time? Like, why? And there's always going to be a reason for that. And that reason is not your fault. This is the splinter. Again, this concept of the foreign object, like it's oftentimes in the ancestral line. A splinter can be something like that happened before you were born, to one of your parents or to your grandparents. I work with that all of the time, and we flush it out. It comes out through the modality, through the process that I've developed. Or a splinter might be something that happened in your childhood, or it could be something that happened like a couple of years ago. It could be something that happened 5 years ago with a bankruptcy. Like, we will find out what is the thing that is causing that particular pattern to play right now. That'd be in the power level peace channel, or to your point, it might be in multiple channels, and then from there, coming into the true state, which is going to be, well, then, what would you do when you are acting from that place of being fully, at home with yourself without having these impediments in the way for you expressing and being and doing what it is that you're really here for.
I'm going to open the floor to you for a second and just see if there's anything in our 34 minutes of speaking that jumps out for you, either something that you can see or a question that you would have based on even the limited bit of information that I've given you that would draw you to a money splinter or a money story, etc. Is there anything that you can see or is popping off for you?
Oh, you mean me looking at you?
Yeah.
I love it. Great. Okay. Well,
Little vulnerable moment. Who knows where this is going to go?
Hey, well, okay. Firstly, thank you for that invitation. And I'm going to say right off the bat, this is actually great for me to do in practice because I can tell you what it is that I see, but I'll tell you something that's a little bit more generalizable, which I can say your primary splinter isn't power, because no one with a power splinter would ask me that question, particularly not in a live recording. Like,
It gets more interesting. Not already.
Yeah.
So to explain that to me, because that's fascinating. Because that was where my mind went, but I'm fascinated by that. So is that an ego piece that someone wouldn't have that level of vulnerability on a call here? What helped you make that connection?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I think, it's partly it's pattern recognition, meaning that I've done this a lot of time. Right. But I do think that there is a level of personal agency and trust in oneself that one has, knowing that you're going to be able to hold yourself and you're going to be okay, regardless of what it is that I say here. Like
gotcha.
So again, coming back to what one of the features of the power channel being open and flowing, at a particular level, right? Which is the level that you're at, the level that you're going to. It's like, you're not in a state of, you're not on guard against the world, right?
Yeah.
You're grounded inside of yourself and you have a trust in your ability to be able to dance with what comes at you. So, that's straight away, I'm like, great.
Awesome.
I don't think power is your top line issue today. I think that I'll go further, but one quote that I really like is the Winston Churchill quote, which is that the farther back you go, then the further into the future you can see. So what it is I can feel in what it is that you're sharing is that I do think that there is a little bit going on inside of your love channel, and that's not anything to do with your love life or your relationships or anything like that. It's really your relationship with yourself. And so here I'm not suggesting that there's any gaps in terms of your worthiness in how you navigate the world, but I think that there's something here which is impeding you from going to that next level into the future. And so, yeah.
I would 100% agree. So I just want to join a couple of dots for you and just see if this plays with the story that you're playing with. So you spoke about the love channel being often the chasing energy. And I would consider myself in a potentially coming from an identity point of view, but also a lack point of view that I do a lot of chasing. So that pinged for me straight away. The second bit that kind of really I just noticed in my body as you were talking was, so I noticed that there was that chasing energy and self-worth, lack, whatever kind of that category that falls into. The next thing that kind of came up as you were talking, when you spoke about the 10x, what comes up for you 10x, those weren't exact words, but it's along the lines of that, was a belief that I had to work harder. And those two automatically joined together because I'm looking at it and going, well, fuck, I can't 10x my work rate to 10x my income. So you nailed it there. Like it just clicked for me instantly, one little piece. So yeah, that's really interesting. Really interesting.
Yeah. So I'd say that your growth edge would be to allow others to give to you as much as you give to others. And so in a really, I mean, obviously here, like there's like a couple, I want to give like a couple of practical, tangible tips around this, given that we're talking about it. So specifically is that I would be really discerning about the business relationships that you're involved in. So I would be doing a review of your boundaries and your standards with everyone, meaning any collaborators, any clients, any team members, and ensuring that there's reciprocal flow inside of all of your business relationships.
It's interesting because as you said that, allow to give to you, I just took a deep breath because I found myself getting emotional with that, and I still have like goosebumps. So you've obviously nailed something there as well, which is really, I find this shit fascinating. There's so many really cool teachers, therapists, coaches, healers out there that just like that skill set when you've really only had a few minutes to kind of, I wouldn't even say you've had a few minutes to work with me, but to pick up those in with very limited data is phenomenal. So yeah, it's really cool to experience that firsthand.
Well, thank you so much for asking the question, because that's the bit I find easy. So it's a bit of life imitating art here.
That's really cool. So what would you say is, I'm just regrouping because it's thrown me in a very good way, but it's just thrown me. So I'm just regrouping a little bit. What would you say is common themes amongst entrepreneurs? I assume entrepreneurs, business owners, CEOs is kind of your sweet spot, but what do you notice as common themes? And do you notice any differences between male and female as common themes as well?
I'll start with that one because the male and female entrepreneur difference is really cool. And it's something which is obviously just based on my sample size, of course, like I'm not making big comments about gender, but just in terms of the male entrepreneurs that I work with versus the female entrepreneurs that I work with. What it is that I find is that the male entrepreneurs tend to really enjoy like the thrill of the roller coaster. So it's very much, and I think, by the way, all entrepreneurs will have these masculine, feminine energies as well inside. So regardless of gender, I think there's something to speak to there. I know this is the case for me. Like there's a part of me where I would identify as someone who's very feminine, but I also love to think about, well, what's the next big achievement? Like, what's the next big mission after I complete one goal or get to the top of one mountain, right? So there tends to be a real desire and motivation and just like something that's almost a bit of a turn on, inside of a male entrepreneur about like, oh, can I like jump on another thrilling ride? Whereas I would say a lot of the female entrepreneurs that I work with are trying to get off the roller coaster. And they're like, this is not my idea of fun at all. Like, I would so much rather like have a really like gentle, relaxing massage at the luxury spa. And I just want more spaciousness in my calendar and I want more ease. And again, obviously, like we all want a little bit of all of it. But
what do you think is that? What if just on that? What would you say from an evolutionary point of view? I was trying to process that. What do you think from an evolutionary point of view that's that thrill and that desire to not be thrilled, so to speak, is coming from?
I mean, it's a great question. I think there's evolutionary components to it. I think there's probably also social components to it. And I would say that every single female entrepreneur I speak with is tired.
Yeah. Would you say, so interesting, would you say from a deeper point of view, the masculine having, if we're kind of talking energies, mindful that we have both energies within us, I'm just thinking out loud, but potentially the masculine's mission, purpose, piece is more energizing than it is for a female purpose piece? If you're kind of talking energies, what makes the female more tired than the male in that?
I mean, yeah.
I'm really stretching it now, but I'm that finding.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm only guessing, these are only hypotheses off the top of my head. I think that, from a social perspective, I would say, where, socially, there's usually a lot of roles that a female entrepreneur is expected to play, not just expected to play of herself, but also expected to play by her family, up and down and across, and then also collectively, So I think we're going through and are in the middle of and have been in a really rapid reconfiguration of gender roles, which is still like a little awkward. Like I think we're still in the messy middle of all of that. So I think that's just a fact that would play into it. I think that when I look at these energies, I like to think about them more as being or doing or different modes of operating. And so what I mean by that is that I think that the doing mode, which tends to be more usually associated with the masculine energy, would be more forward focused, like it's got more of that lean in energy to it. And then I think that the female or the more being energy, I should say, is more receptive in nature. So I think those different modes of operating definitely have a part to play, but I also think it really depends upon the individual. I think I don't know enough to say, well, this is how it is, like, but I do think that we do on the planet Earth live on a planet of polarity. I think we see polarity play out constantly throughout every single area of our lives, good and evil just being just the most obvious polarity in addition to the masculine feminine energy. So yeah, I think all of us are playing around with that, and the causes or the manifestations of that inside of an individual can just be so multivalent.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So just for you on that topic, who's very aware of these type of things, how do you navigate business yourself in dancing the masculine and feminine energies as a business owner yourself?
It's such an interesting question, because I've got to say, I used to think about this so much more than I do
You just do now.
now. Yeah. I think one of the frames that I have used for my entire business journey, which has now been 13 years, has been the different modes of operating, the being and the doing. And I find that I tend to very naturally be in the doing energy, meaning the push and the hustle and the drive, whether that was something that was just inbuilt inside of me, whether that was something that was socially conditioned because I went to law school and became a lawyer, which is, such a go-getting profession and tends to be very intellectual and living from the neck up. And for whatever reason, I resonated with that a lot earlier in my life. So for me, coming back into the being to retain a sense of internal balance or harmony, meaning like just to the point that we were just speaking about before about receiving, or allowing there to be results that aren't necessarily linked directly to hard work, because the reality is that money is not directly linked to effort. Effort can definitely generate money, but they're different energies and they have completely different rules. And what I mean by different energies here, specifically, I'm talking about work and money. They're different energies and they have different rules. So, but to come back to the point about the masculine and the feminine, I think that much earlier in my journey, that was something I really grappled with, specifically in relation to restoring a sense of balance between those two different modes of operating, the being and the doing, because I was so heavily skewed towards the doing. And then I think that it's something which is, I don't want to say I've mastered it, because I don't think anyone ever masters balance, but it's not something that is my core challenge in this season of my business. I have a lot of ease. I have a lot of strategy in how I've set up my business. I have a lot of spaciousness in my calendar. And so there tends to be more of a natural flow. There's been a reconciliation inside of myself, I think, of something that was quite challenging earlier in my journey.
Even just listening to you talk about receiving, which coincides with what we're talking about earlier, that, yeah, you've unlocked a few things for me to sit with, which has been really amazing. Ezzie, for those that want to find out more about you and the work that you do, where's the best spot to send them?
Oh yeah, so on my website, ezziespencer.com, I have a quiz. So if you're interested in finding out, well, where is my money splinter? There's a quiz that you can go through and you'll get the result. Like, is your top money splinter in your power channel, your love channel, or your peace channel? And then that email with the result comes with a little healing meditation. So it's like I did with you, like, I'm not just going to say, there's your splinter. It's like, well, what do you do with it? So there's a really short and sweet healing meditation that comes when you do the quiz. So ezziespencer.com is my website. I'm also Ezzie Spencer on Instagram. So you spell that EZZIESPENCER.
So insightful. I know Shani obviously spoke very highly of you off the back of you guys chatting, and just with some of my money stories and insights, this has been really valuable. So appreciate you and the magic that you continue to bring to the world.
Oh, it's been really fun. Thank you for the opportunity to get to do a demo.